All right. Well, we'll get started then. I don't think we'll wait for the rest, but good morning and afternoon, I suppose, to everybody who has joined us. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. This is Matt Scherer speaking. I'm with my colleague, Doug Sellan, and today we're going to be presenting the webinar on selling a dental practice and preparing for the next steps. So we'll get right into it. But before we begin, just to give you a little bit of information, PMA Practice Transition is an independent company. The ADS Transitions is a consortium of independent transition companies throughout the country, and we get together. There's 23 voting members. We've got a ton of experience, which is awesome because we can lean on each other. But that's the difference between PMA and ADS Transitions. So PMA is a part of ADS Transitions, just to clarify for everybody if anybody out there was confused. So we'll just jump right into it and talk about why do doctors look to sell their practices. Some feel like after 40 years, they've got enough in retirement. They've made it, so to speak. So it's time to hand over the reins to somebody else. Another reason might be that the practice is in decline. So the tough part is are you retiring because you're slowing down, or are you slowing down because you're retiring? So that could be one of the reasons why you might want to sell your practice. Others might think of the financial reward. So you've spent the last 20, 30, 40 years building an asset, and you want to reap the benefits of that asset. So just know that that dental practice is an asset. So just closing your doors, obviously there's nothing at the end of the rainbow for that. The next one is fear of COVID. So that's really a new one, really is fear. We haven't had this fear. We've been seeing a lot of doctors selling because they were thinking about it previous to COVID, and now that COVID has hit and the doors were shut down for a little while, that they're just tired and they want to sell. So COVID's played a big part in a lot of the sellers, at least in the last few months, wanting to sell their practice. The freedom. So freedom of not owning a dental practice. There's a lot of dentists we talk to that love dentistry. They're just tired of running the business. So they want to sell it, still practice. So that gives them the freedom of just kind of punching the clock, if you will. Goes along with change too, just the change of scenery from being an owner to just a worker, if you will. And then lastly, and hopefully this isn't the reason, but there are health reasons why dentists need to sell, whether they have shoulder issues or hand issues or anything like that. So lots of reasons why people want to sell.
And that's kind of where COVID kind of played along with that in the health. Some people had underlying conditions, and even though they were fine from a health standpoint, this kind of accelerated that. And then some individuals now we're going through a potential round 2 of COVID. So some rebounded, they're doing fine, doing well, but now they're concerned that, wow, is this going to happen again? Is it going to be as bad or worse?
So we talked about reasons why a dentist might want to sell their practice. Now let's talk about the different types of sales or purchases for the buyer. First off is a traditional sale or a traditional purchase where I'm a dentist, I'm a sole practitioner, I want to sell my practice, and I've got a buyer who wants to buy it. Another one is an associate to own. So I have a big enough practice to where I can bring an associate in, and at some point in the near future, that associate is going to take over. And one thing I'd caution you against the associate to own, I talk to a lot of dentists who like that concept. It's a great concept. Banks love that concept because the patients are used to seeing another dentist, and when that dental practice changes hands, there's really no miss there with with patients and things like that. But the big misnomer is, well, I just bring somebody into my practice and have them become an associate and then sell it to them. The problem with that is if your practice isn't big enough as for a 2-doctor practice, then bringing an associate in is a lot tougher than you think. You have to remember when bringing an associate in to your practice, associates are coming, girls and gals are graduating dental school with $250,000 to $300,000 in debt. So they've got to make enough money to support their debt. You've got to make enough money to support your lifestyle. And does the practice support that? So that's the tough part about an associate to own.
And is the facility large enough for two?
That's true.
Today, you may have started to scale your hours back. So you've opened up a day or two, but still, are you overlapping? Can they make enough money? Can you make enough money to do so?
Yeah. Similar to an associate to own, you have partnership or buy-in. So maybe that associate, after that associate has worked there, now they're buying in, or you're becoming partners. There's an incremental sale, so that's a sale over time. So maybe you find a young dentist who wants to come in. You don't really want to do an associate to own. They really want a piece of the pie right away. You can do an incremental sale. So that's incrementally selling them the business all the way up to full ownership. And then the last one is selling to a DSO. So heading to the corporate route. Again, the tough part about DSO is that, DSOs have a fairly square box, and if the practice doesn't fit in that square box, then they're not going to buy it. So, and the big thing with DSOs, if you are looking to truly retire from dentistry, is that most corporate groups require the dentist seller to stay on for 2 to 3 years or longer. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking, gee, maybe I will sell to a DSO. Another thing you should do when thinking about selling your practice is try to plan in advance. That doesn't always happen. We know that, sometimes, you wake up one day and you're like, hey, I'm done with this. Whether it's COVID or something else, or, you get some bad news health-wise and you need to sell. But if you can, at least try to sell and plan in advance 3 to 5 years. We suggest that, 3 to 5 years is that sweet spot. Banks require at least 3 years of financials. So looking at 3 to 5 years, there's a good shot that you can start talking to your CPA and cleaning up your financials if they need cleaning up. And that gives you that time frame to do so. We also suggest that you get a practice appraisal within 3 to 5 years of retirement. That way you can kind of keep your eye on the ball, along with allowing the transition company to keep their eye on the ball as well. So what we do at PMA is we'll do an appraisal. We'll update it every single year for the doctor, and that allows us to kind of see where revenues are trending. And maybe it's not a 5-year plan. Maybe it's a 3-year plan or a 2-year plan.
It also gives them the opportunity to write the way, whether it's a couple of insurances that are bringing down the profitability. Maybe there's some staff that needs to be tended to. Maybe the facility needs to be updated modestly, inexpensively, just some very inexpensive things, some ceiling tiles that have some stains, some light bulbs that need replaced. These are things that we see every day when we're going out to appraise practices, that if you had done some of these simple things, it could potentially increase your value, but also attract more buyers when they come through your facility. Because they're not just looking at cash flow, they're looking at the practice as well.
Yeah, and that goes really to the housekeeping part of it. So maybe invest, if you're 3 to 5 years out, talk to your financial or your CPA or your Shine rep or your Patterson rep, and if you're not digital, maybe it makes sense to go digital, and within 3 to 5 years you should get the return on your investment back. And one thing I will tell you that when we do an appraisal, we take into account whether you're you have digital or you're antiquated or whatnot. But even if we take that into account, buyers look for ways a lot of times to lower value. And that's one way is, hey, I've got to put in digital x-ray because that's what I was taught in dental school. So it's going to cost me X. So that's why the price is going to be Y. And then lastly, definitely talk to your financial advisor. Make sure that financially you're ready to sell. The last thing you want to have happen is that you require or need the practice sale to allow you to retire. Because we've spoke to dentists in the past who have a number in mind that they need to get out of their practice in order to retire, because that's part of their retirement. And that number just can't be met or isn't met or whatnot. So hopefully you definitely, if anything, you should be talking to your financial advisor, make sure that, that you're financially set, and then the practice sale is just icing on the top. So,
well, that's part of the appraisal as well, so that you can take this to your financial advisor. They can put that into your plan, and so they have an approximate number that they know to work with. So when retirement does come and you get this check to take care of executing that plan, they know what kind of numbers actually they should be looking at.
Very good point. Here's some key components for buyers. What buyers look for: they look for a fit. So is the practice the right fit for me? Is the price/value good for me? We always preach value. Price is what you pay, value is what you receive. So you need to see the value for the price that the practice is at. And then what are the terms? What are the terms of the transition? And is the doctor just walking away? Are they willing to stay on and mentor the dentist? So those are all things to think about. What makes a good fit? Let's talk a little bit about that. Urban versus rural, personality style. Is the buyer business, do they have any business savvy? The philosophy or clinical style, that's huge. Does the buyer's philosophy and clinical style fit yours? And then the buyer's spouse a lot of times comes into play. What we preach, and to younger buyers or any buyer, is that there's really no such thing as the perfect practice, right? So buyers always look at dental chairs and they say, wow, those chairs are older. And I always say, yeah, but do they work? So, but that's something that we do as a transition firm, is kind of weed out those buyers and make sure that, hey, if this is a rural practice, do they really want to practice in a rural area? Or, what is their philosophy and clinical style, and does it match yours, and things like that. Fit bottom line: can the buyer call this practice home? Does it meet the quality of work life? Can the buyer replicate schedule and procedures? The bank's going to really look at that one pretty hard, especially from a revenue standpoint. And then, does it meet the minimum financial needs? Again, when buyers are coming out of dental school, they're coming out with quite a bit of debt. They typically have a home. They typically have a car payment, and then they have to pay for the note to buy the practice. So the bank's looking at all those types of things to make sure that the practice meets their financial needs.
In many cases, when we see a new buyer coming in, they're a bit younger, most often, and they're often bringing procedures that are potentially being referred out, or procedures that weren't even being considered. This is great for the buyer, but it's not going to change the value of the practice that they're purchasing. They're purchasing the practice based on historical production and numbers. So it's important to, when you're presenting it to a potential buyer, you're not saying, well, I refer out X, Y, and Z, and the value really should be based, a bit higher because the new person, he or she, will keep all that stuff. Well, that's true that they had the potential to keep it, but that's not going to change the value. A lot of times, sellers and some think that just because I referred out, I should be able to capture that in part of my sales price, and that's not typically the case.
So let's talk about fair market value and methods for determining fair market value. So you have asset value or book value, you have capitalization of earnings, and then rules of thumb. So these are really three ways that people tend to appraise practices. We'll talk about capitalization of earnings. So what we look at is the total economic benefit with a multiple based on current economic, demographic, and professional market conditions. This method is probably the most accurate and realistic estimate for fair market value for dental practices. So it's taking, what can I make as a dentist? What's left over? And then based on all those conditions, there's a factor that comes into play, and that factor is divided into what we call excess earnings, and that's where capitalization of earnings, the value comes from. Sorry, that's where the value comes from. Some of the common rules of thumb is percentage of annual gross, percentage of annual collections, or my favorite is the 60, 65, 70% of 3-year average gross. So these are common rules of thumb that I would stay away from. And I know that everybody has heard the percentage of annual gross. And we're going to show why those rules of thumb don't work. So we have basically two practices here. One gross is 450, so that's top line collections. The other one is 700. The practice grossing 450 nets 200, and then the other one at 700 also nets 200. So we're gonna put a sale price of 65% on both of them. So we've got a sale price on the first one of 292.5. That's 65% of 450, and then 455, which is 65% of 700. This is a little bit high on the interest rate, but the debt service or the loan amount yearly this is on a 10-year loan at 5.5. So for practice A, it would be 38,100. And then on practice B, it would be 59,256. So the buyer's income, you can see below that. So you take the net minus the debt service, and that's where you get the income. So this is why we say rules of thumb don't work, because I'd certainly prefer practice A over practice B.
Right. So you can produce an additional $250,000 and make $121,000 less. Or I'm sorry, $21,000 less.
21, yeah.
Right. Not a good deal.
No. All right, fair price. So we always say, we look for, maybe you've heard this or not, but the win-win, right? Well, we believe that the win-win is that the fair price is at or above fair market value, and that's for the seller. And then for the buyer, the win is the fair price is at or below market value. So the win-win is really created when both parties kind of feel like they left a little bit on the table. And that's what we talk about, fair price. Here's a little PMA mantra for you. It's Warren Buffett actually said this quote: price is what you pay, value is what you get. And we preach that a lot to buyers. So look at the value for the price. If you're thinking that you want to offer a lower price, then maybe you're not seeing the value, and maybe this isn't the right practice for you.
And really, praising and valuing a practice is more of an art, not a science. I mean, you have to see the practice, know the area, know what the buyers look like. Is it rural? Is it not? Is it specialty? Is it not? The age of the practice, the technology. There's so many factors that go into an appraisal that it's not just throwing a dart at a number and see what happens.
And that's why we say stay away from the rules of thumb. Because you can throw out 65% or whatever number you've heard in the past, and that might be the right number. That could be a high number. That could be a low number. So, the last thing you want to do is sell yourself a little short on the asset that you created over the last 40 years. And price when an appraisal is done, I would say one of the more important things is the cash flow or net. It's what basically the buyer is purchasing. They're purchasing a revenue stream or an income. So that's probably one of the larger. There's, as Doug stated a little bit ago, there's a lot of factors like rural and urban and things like that, antiquated and not antiquated, and all that stuff goes into it. The biggest denominator is the cash flow of the practice.
So some of the critical components of the practice appraisal, as we talked about some of them already, is the economic benefit, the supply and demand, the condition of the practice, the procedure mix, the insurance mix, owner-employee transition, and of course any expense adjustments. And really, we'll go through each of these, but the total economic benefit, to calculate this, we normalize the accounting, we add back discretionary expenditures to the owner's income. And there's a lot of discretion that the owner has, and they're all majority legal. But we go through those, making the appropriate adjustments based on our 30 plus years of doing this and storing massive amounts of data, not only PMA, but also ADS, where we can see what industry averages are for supplies, lab, payroll, rent, maintenance and repairs, everything that goes into a practice to run it. Are they being accounted for appropriately? And then we look for the outliers, and then we make proper adjustments based on facts, not just because it's industry average, but we want to make sure that they hold water, because once this appraisal is presented to another financial advisor, they're going to test our waters too.
And this is probably the main reason why we said earlier on is plan in advance, plan 3 to 5 years out, because again, the banks are going to require at least 3 years of financials. So if you are putting some discretionary stuff through the practice, that gives you the opportunity to maybe not do that for the next 3 years. You might have to pay a little bit more in taxes, but buyers, banks like when they can see the cash versus having to add back a bunch of discretionary stuff and then trying to prove it.
So we've already just covered most of that, but some of the add backs, of course, there's depreciation, there's amortization, there's also depletion, which comes into play if you actually own a farm. Autos, excessive travel and meals, family on the payroll. We see it all the time. Is there a family member in the practice that needs to be replaced, or are they just on the payroll? Are they being compensated at or above the appropriate amount? So those are adjustments that we also commonly have to make. Owner's retirement and pension, and also a lot of times we see probably half the time maybe that the seller owns the building. Is he or she charging themselves rent? Is it appropriate? What will the rent look like going forward? What kind of rent is it going to be? What kind of lease is it going to be? There's multiple different impacts to the cash flow that this could have. Supply and demand is a critical one. Rural versus non-rural, specialty. So second most critical component to a practice value is the location. Geography does drive the demand, number of sellers, the number of buyers. Buyers today are coming out of these universities that, they don't necessarily want to go to a rural community, but some do. Matt and I actually go into schools in our market. We have 6 dental schools. So we do go and speak, to some of the 3rd and 4th years and talk to them about location. And we talk to them about cash flow, and these are the places you want to go. And some have, but some don't. So keep that in mind, that it may take longer to transition your practice if you are in a rural community, and especially if you're a specialist in a rural community. It could take twice as long. I'm not saying it will, but it could. And that's, I guess, another key point about ADS is that we're a national group. So when we when we and other members are listing your practices for sale, we're marketing that practice on a national level, not just in one community. So we do get buyers coming in from all over the country, and that's a huge benefit to be working with an ADS transition company.
And certainly the world events. We had the 2008 recession that lasted probably through 2010. So what happened then is a lot of people didn't recover very well from that and had to sell their practice due to whatever reason. And now we're in COVID, so we're seeing a spike in the market. So I would say pre-COVID, it was probably a seller's market. There were probably more buyers than there were sellers. Now post-COVID, it's starting to become a buyer's market. So that drives supply and demand, drives value. So,
yeah. And also we're seeing an increase in consumer confidence, and that's where banks and accountants and attorneys play an essential role in creating the confidence for these buyers to say, hey, it's okay to go and pursue this. The economy doesn't look that bad. The stock market rebounded. You have an election playing a part in some people's decision making right now, whether or not they should buy or not buy, or sell or not sell. So there's always headwinds and tailwinds coming at both buyers and sellers, and we're just trying to calm everybody down so that people can move forward with a well-educated decision.
And right now, banks are definitely financing post-COVID, and they're practically giving money away at the interest rates that they're offering right now.
We're seeing 3% interest rates,
right.
So it's a very good time to be borrowing. That's for 100% financing in most cases, and we'll talk more about that towards the end. So personal goodwill relates to the ability, skills, experience, history, patient relationships, staff rapport, and reputation of the owner, doctor, and the practice. That's what personal goodwill is. It's your name, what you've done for your practice in your community.
So there's two things that in a sale, right? There's the assets of the practice, which we all know that used dental equipment does not really have a lot of value. There is some value there, certainly, but it doesn't have a lot of value. And then there's personal goodwill. That's the patients. That's where most of the value comes from, is your relationship with your patients, your staff, and things like that. And it's transferring that goodwill. So every buyer is going to want to make sure that goodwill transfers so that they don't lose patients. So that's what they're really, the bulk of the purchase is involved in.
So the owner-employee transition, third most critical component to the practice value is the ability and desire to transfer that personal goodwill. Mentor and support, family and spouse, death and disability, or disability and death. So is the seller going to just exchange the keys in the parking lot, or are they going to stick around a little bit to help with the transition? It's interesting that so many buyers, that's one of their questions while we're showing a practice. What's the transition like? Is he or she going to stick around? How many days, hours are they willing to work? How will they be compensated? Buyers feel the need to have you there, so they think initially, but after a couple weeks, they got it. They should have it, and they should be able to move on with or without you staying on for a long period of time. There are some that maybe this wasn't the best decision for them, but they want to know that you're going to be a good supporter of theirs, and the majority of the time that is the case.
And I would say the last two, disability and death, another good reason to plan 3 to 5 years out if you can, because as you may or may not know, especially in death, when you try to sell a dental practice when the doctor has passed away, the goodwill is leaving the practice very quickly. So it's important, if you planned in advance and something like that happens, God forbid, that whoever is taking over can sell the practice in a expedient fashion.
And same thing with a disability. If you develop a disability of some sort and you continue to keep practicing, slowly your practice will start to most likely decline. And unfortunately, sometimes staff will see that. They will start exiting. Patients will see that. They'll start leaving. And sometimes your competitors will take advantage of that.
Right.
And so again, another way your value can deteriorate rapidly is when this is occurring. So again, if you are, again, the disability could come up at any given time as we all age. But again, having an appraisal done early on, that you're just that much closer to a possible transition than not. So again, just another good reason to have that done in advance. So other factors, just to name a few, we mentioned a few of these, but the equipment, the overhead, is it in line or not? Patients, the treatment mix, are you referring out a lot, or are you just sticking with one thing?
I'll go back to patients really quick. We've seen practices where the dentist might be in their 70 or even 80s, and most of the patients are in their 70s and 80s. And buyers, believe it or not, do look at the patient mix. I get asked a lot of times for patient ages. What's the age range of the patients? Are they all older patients? Because many of you have seen, a couple generations of family
Patients,
members.
right.
So just keep that in mind as well.
And fee for service isn't always the best. Having a variety of some things could be healthy, because as Matt mentioned, patients, and if they're all fee for service patients, again, it's almost like a referral. Will you be able to retain that person because they're paying to see that person? They're not there just because of that insurance plan and that person. Market conditions, not only nationally but regionally, what is the conditions of the area? Is there manufacturing that has come and gone, or it's coming? Is Google or Amazon expanding? I mean, there's a lot of markets that are starting to reignite and be redeveloped, and they're some of the millennials are liking these areas. So the intangibles, the competition, technology, staff management systems, fees, and facility all play critical factors. So another key concept, value is dynamic. Value may change when there are financial or market changes. We all know that. Value is subjective. Who is appraising? Are they local, experienced? Are they independent? Who are they representing? Are they doing dual representation, or are they just representing a seller or a buyer? Very important thing. We will not appraise a practice if we do not physically see it. You have to have eyes on it. You can't just be looking at financials and pictures. So who's buying, who is financing? So avoid some of the common appraisal mistakes. Not hiring an experienced local professional, accepting the rules of thumb as reality. Have a thorough written appraisal performed. Looking only at the numbers, that's a huge mistake. Valuing the future, the field of dreams that, I'm going to build 7, 8, 10 ops, and they will come. Not focusing on the current conditions and trends.
Yeah, I think anybody can sit at a desk and certainly plug in numbers and say, hey, here's a value, but without seeing the practice and, getting a feel for the area, you just don't, that plays a factor in the appraisal. So be cautious of that.
So bottom line, fair market value, it's the economic benefit, plus or minus some market factors. It is what a qualified doctor is willing to pay for the practice in the current market conditions.
And fair does not equal fair market. So keep that in mind.
Right.
Many rural practices offer significant opportunities not available in most metropolitan practices in general. As the distance increases, the cash flow increases, yet the market value decreases. And market value, what plays into market value is buyer pool. So how many people, just like specialty practices, they're a little bit tougher to sell because you have less specialists So as you get more rural, it's tougher to find buyers to go to those rural practices. So even though cash flow increases typically because you're
lower rent, lower overhead.
Yep, lower overhead, lower everything because it's in a rural area.
Your equipment and supplies costs are going to be the same. So is your lab most likely, but your labor, which is your most expensive expense, that tends to be a little bit less. And same thing with rent.
So your cash flow increases, but yet the value decreases again because it's tougher to find buyers, which is supply and demand. Cash flow improves because of reductions in overhead, obviously. Market value declines if there are fewer buyers for rural practices. So again, we've kind of touched on this. Rural practices, and Doug and I preach this in dental schools all the time. If you can go to a rural practice, doesn't mean that metropolitan practices aren't profitable. We're not saying that. Please don't hopefully take that the wrong way. It's just we've seen that many rural practices are a lot more profitable for the reasons we already explained, and it's just tough to get buyers to get out to the rural areas.
So in terms of the deal, I mean, cash at close, or is it going to be a note? Some, many years ago, some of you started your practice, seller financing was more common than not. Today, banks are giving out 100% financing. Is it an asset sale, asset goodwill allocations? Again, these are things that we go through with your accountants and your advisors, making sure that the allocations are appropriate.
I would tell you too, real quick, probably 98, 99% of the deals are asset sales versus stock sales. So we're not going to get into the difference between asset versus stock, but I would say that, the good percentage is asset sales.
And there's pros and cons of both, and tax advantages for sellers and buyers in different ways. But again, like Matt says, most of them are asset sales. Are the accounts receivable part of the transition? And again, there's pros and cons to that. I think today, with today's technology, if you are automated with some of the most common practice management softwares, your ARs are typically not as significant as they may have been in years past. If they're properly being coded and submitted, you're probably recognizing payment quickly as opposed to in past, but maybe not. And that's another thing. Part of the due diligence in housekeeping is cleaning up your ARs prior to offering your practice for sale. So, writing off some of those things that you've been carrying for a few years, maybe on payment plans or whatever else.
Right.
Staff and operations, who's staying, who's going, who needs to leave. Items included, not included. Maybe there's some artwork, some personal things. This is all part of the pre-close that we would go through. The non-compete, although, if you're later in years, it may not be as a significant thing to you, but it's still important to the buyer, and it's also very important to the bank. The bank often dictates the terms for a non-compete. It needs to be reasonable. It needs to be enforceable. 3 to 5 years, usually tied to a certain amount of miles, is pretty common. You put something else that says 50 miles, it's probably not going to hold water. So you probably, again, trust your advisors when it comes to that, and be reasonable for what you're expecting. And if there's any type of consulting and employment agreements, how you're going to be compensated for you staying around and helping out this individual for a period of time. How will you be compensated? Do you want to be compensated? Some do, some don't. Maybe you are on loan for some vacations or relief work. Maybe you want to still be able to treat your family in this practice for a period of time. Those are common things that we hear and see.
Yeah, I would say, add to this, is the number one question I get when I show a practice or talk to a buyer about a practice is, what's going to happen with the staff? Is the staff, number one, do they know, which typically they don't know? And number two, will the staff stay? So that's something we'll ask the selling doctor, what staff members do he or she think will stay based on age and things like that. So that's a very important one.
So then you come with a letter of intent. It's a non-binding document that is written and offered to the purchaser to practice. It kind of is the framework of the final purchase documents. It outlines the price, the terms, the contingencies, and it protects the buyer from other purchasers during the evaluation in their due diligence period. And that's usually for anywhere from 14 to 21 days, most due diligence periods that they're asking. Sometimes they don't ask for any. It's reasonable, gives them the opportunity to come in and look under the hood and see a little bit more about the practice, ask their questions that they think they need to do. Also gets them connected with a lender and get their financing started as well. So the due diligence, the process of verifying the practice is what the seller says it is, should be performed within 20 or 30 days after the LOI is executed, or hit that. Banks are asking for 3+ years of tax returns. With COVID, some banks are asking for a little extra. They're wanting to see some P&Ls that are from same time previous years, just to kind of see, has the practice rebound through that shutdown period. So we know what they're asking for, so we're asking for them those items up front. Chart review and analysis. Other records such as payroll, receivables, collections, payables, depreciation, fixed assets, cash activity, bank statements, etc. Some of your merchant statement accounts, different things like that. Any type of subscriptions that need to be canceled or renewed with the new owner. Equipment review. Is the equipment still under warranty? Most cases it's not. Most equipment has a 5-year warranty. Some has 3, some has 10, just depends on what it is. And then any software reports. Again, there's a lot of great technology out there today, and these things can be updated quite easily.
One thing I would add about due diligence is just know that there's no set parameter for due diligence. Some buyers ask for very little, some buyers ask for a ton. It really depends on who their advisors are and things like that, but just be prepared and know that just because they have the tax returns and a few reports, they may want to ask for more stuff, and don't necessarily be put off by somebody asking for a little bit more. You might have had 2 buyers look at your practice, 2 different buyers look at your practice. One asked for 5 reports and the other one asked for 10 reports. So there's no really set due diligence, if you will. And then there's some contingencies with, obviously, when a buyer submits an LOI to purchase the practice. The biggest one is financing. So can they get financing? The lease or building purchase. So if you're not the landlord and you don't own the building, the bank's going to require a lease, whether you are the owner or not the owner. And can they obtain a lease? We've had some issues with landlords in the past where they're trying to play hardball, and if we can't get a reasonable lease, then you don't have a deal. The due diligence period, again, they may have offered X, but during due diligence, they found a few things that they weren't aware of or nobody was aware of, and now they're coming back and saying, well, yeah, we were offering X, but now we're changing our offer to Y because of these things that were found in practice. And then obviously it's our job to sort through what are those things. Are they truly pertinent items that they found, or is it just surface stuff, if you will? And then the transition period, and then credentialing is a big one. Credentialing takes a long time. It's kind of an arduous process, and being able to get credentialed and all that in a timely fashion.
So to prepare for the close, we set a date. It's got to be realistic for all these things to happen. We have a pre-contract meetings where we kind of get into the weeds of the deal. Talked about all the things we already talked about, but the allocations and who's staying, who's not, just everything that could derail or slow a transaction down. Then we go through the asset purchase, the employment agreements, sign the asset purchase agreement, any employment agreements. Staff is notified. There's letters to patients the buyer meets the staff, and the money transfers. These things aren't all in that exact particular order, but these are the things that have to occur so the closing can occur.
And just keep in mind with an LOI typically is non-binding, so it doesn't necessarily bind you to the deal, nor does it bind the buyer to the deal. So once the asset purchase agreement, employment agreements have been sorted out between the lawyers and everything's ready to go, the one thing we like to do is have you sign the purchase agreement at least 2 weeks in advance of close date. So that way you have time to notify your staff, get letters together, buyer can meet the staff and all that fun stuff. And then money transfers on the actual close date.
And that's when the bill of sale is executed.
Right.
So
we'll talk a little bit about for sale, FSBO. They use that in the residential real estate market, but it's a for sale by owner. So these are some common mistakes that you can make if you're trying to sell your practice yourself. The biggest thing I think is probably confidentiality. Most dentists who are looking to sell their practice, the staff does not know. They don't want the staff to know again until the purchase agreement. They have an agreed upon purchase agreement and it's been signed, because at that point it locks everybody into the deal. So how do you market the practice, bring buyers into the practice, and do that all confidential? Not have an appraisal done. So a lot of times that means you could be suspect to a lower value than what your practice is actually worth. Not acting in a timely manner. Time is money. So when Doug and I used to work for a large dental lender, a lot of the deals that fell apart were for sale by owner, because time kills all deals. So it just drug out for whatever reason, and then the deal just never happened. So you got to be careful of that.
Or you get a good offer and you think a better offer is coming,
right? And
then you don't get a better offer, and the next offer, maybe there's no more offers. I'm not saying that you should always take your first offer, but a lot of times the first offer is one of the better offers. But again, I think it's really setting the right value, not working for a win-win, or you think your practice is worth a lot more because you have an emotional attachment to it, not so much what the reality of the market is. Overutilizing your accountant or attorney is like, oh, I'll just call my accountant. He knows a lot of dentists. He'll help me sell it. Maybe not, but again, that's not their specialty.
That's not their primary job.
Right.
They have lots of clients.
Or you talk to your supply rep or your person that does your equipment repairs. And next, he or she's telling everybody. So again, the confidentiality. You tell one, they tell one. Next, 100 people know, and now what's happening is your competitors. Blood's in the water, and they're poaching your staff and your patients. These things could happen. Taking too much time off. As we get in our later years, we went on vacation more. This past year, we haven't been able to do much of that. But historically, we would see our sellers taking a lot more time off, scaling back their schedule. And again, you used to do this, but what you're doing now is this, and that's what you've been doing. This is what the value of the practice is now, not what it was when you weren't taking the time off, when you weren't referring out, which is okay. These are just decisions you've chosen to do, and then these things are obviously affect the value. And then, to market the practice, how are you going to market it? You're not going to put a flyer up in your church or on a utility pole. You need a marketing company to help you do these type of things.
And then final tips for selling is curb appeal sells inside and out. So definitely take a hard look if you're thinking in the next 3 to 5 years or tomorrow, selling your practice. A lot of times dentists walk into their practice through the back door or the side door. Rarely do they go through the front door and through the waiting room. So walk through the front door and sit in your waiting room and see from the patient's eyes what the practice looks like. Is it cluttered? Things like that. Little things you can do to your practice can certainly help curb appeal. like paint and carpet and inexpensive things. So
Yeah.
inside and out.
And also sit in each chair, in each operatory, and look up, and what do you see? Stains, if they're there. Ceiling tiles are so inexpensive to replace. And they're very easy. You can do it yourself in most cases. But if it's ceiling tiles or paint, those are just cosmetic things that definitely preserve value.
Yeah. Sitting in your chair too, does that rip in the chair? Do you feel something poking you? So things like that, it sounds funny, but you'd be surprised. But definitely, take a look. And then certainly knowing the current market and the technology. Again, 3 to 5 years out, if you invest in a little bit of technology, we're not telling you to go out and buy a cone beam and you're going to sell your practice in a year. You're probably not going to get the value out of that cone beam. But, some things like, digital x-ray, things like that will certainly, I think you get the benefit from within a certain time frame. And then our final thought is it's far better to sell a great practice at a fair price than a fair practice at a great price. And that is it. That is my information, and then Doug's as well. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to, I don't know if we can unmute microphones or if we can, I didn't see anything come up in the Q&A. You have anything in your Q&A?
No.
So if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And we'll give it a few minutes here. Hopefully you found this useful. If you have any questions on, and you don't want to ask it in front of a group, certainly you can call either one of us. We'd be happy to talk through, or your local ADS rep.
Yep. And this presentation was recorded, so it will be on ADS's website. So you can absolutely be able to view it later. We just had a question. Does the buyer ever do the appraisal? So yes, I actually have one now where the buyer hired PMA to do the appraisal on the practice. The seller didn't have an appraisal. He just kind of had a number in his head. So we were asked to do the appraisal. So yes, buyers do ask for appraisals. And then negotiate. I'm not sure what you mean by, does a buyer ever ask or ever do an appraisal and then negotiate? So if a buyer says, hey, can you appraise this practice for me? I want to buy it. And then they negotiate with the seller. Sure, that can certainly happen. Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned, we typically represent sellers, but we've had buyers come to us that are looking to buy a practice that's for sale by owner. And then they want us to do an appraisal on it. They've used that as a tool to negotiate, because maybe the seller had a price in mind and they have a price in mind.
Hopefully that answered your question. And that came from Catherine.
Yeah, that's it.
Any other questions out there? Thank you for that question, Catherine. It was a good question.
Well, again, we appreciate the opportunity to bring this information to you today. Like I said, our contact information is up here. Feel free to reach out to any of us, or the invite that you received for this. It also has our information, and we'd love the opportunity to speak with you. Oh, another question. Sorry.
Where is the link for the presentation on ADS? I don't know if that's up yet, but there should be something on the ADS website that you'll be able to click on for this presentation. And then cost of service, I would say wherever you're located, Catherine, talk to your local ADS rep. I don't want to speak for anybody out there and what they charge. But I will tell you that typically brokers charge 10% of the sale price. You're welcome. Good questions.
Great questions. Thank you.
Anyone else? I think Lauren will probably have the information up on the website soon. So be on the lookout for that.
So Lauren, if you want to take the control back, you're welcome to. And thanks again. Everybody have a great day.